Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and in this video we're going to build our very first React component. Now, this isn't going to be anything fancy. It's going to be a hello world type example, but it's going to be our first React component and an introduction for you to write code in JSX. So essentially some HTML inside of your JavaScript, which might feel foreign at first, but this is a nice basic introduction, so it's not going to feel too scary. So let's get started on that right now. Okay, so we now have our basic template ready and we're ready to start writing some JavaScript. But first, we need some sort of a container here. Let's go ahead and just make a div. And I'm just going to have this div with an ID, and it's just going to be area. This isn't going to be anything official. We're just going to be using this div essentially to render our content in. Notice how there's nothing in here, and we're not going to have anything in here. Now, below this div, let's go ahead and write a new script tag. Now this time we're going to have to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to be writing JavaScript here. However, we want a certain type of type here. Now before HTML5, you used to always have to declare type. In this instance, we need to declare a type so that Babel will actually transform this. We can say text hyphen / Babel. Now inside of our script, we can first write some code that's going to render this to the DOM. We can say React DOM, and DOM is in all caps, .render. Now we have an open parenthesis and close parentheses. It'll autocomplete for you, and we'll wrap that off with a semicolon. Now inside of here is where we're going to be actually rendering something. In fact, we're going to first just put an H1 here. It can just be simply like hello. And we can have an H1 closing tag. And now we're going to have a comma. So the first thing we're passing into this render method is just an H1 and hello inside of the closing H1. Now, at first you may be thinking already, well, I have HTML inside of a JavaScript method. This is getting weird. Okay, well, it's going to feel a lot more natural once we get going. So don't worry about it. Now we can say document .get element by ID. Now you should be very familiar with this method. It's essentially just grabbing an element on our page based on its ID. We can say area, and that's going to be the end of this. So we're passing into this render method hello, and we're going to tell it to render into this area. So when we refresh our page, we should be seeing an H1 inside of this div. Now I mentioned React components. Now we haven't actually made a component yet. We're essentially just rendering HTML to our page using JavaScript. So let's head to our page. Let's refresh. And as you can see, we have hello here. Notice how in our HTML we never actually had this hello. It's just inside of this React DOM render. So React is actually taking care of that rendering here, and as you can see, we have hello. Okay, so that is absolutely nothing thrilling at all. That's, pretty lame. So let's go ahead and actually make our first React component. And now this React component itself isn't going to be anything special. In fact, it's largely going to be outputting the same amount of things. However, it should give you an idea about how we're going to be proceeding here. We're going to be essentially building various components. They're going to have their own properties, their own events, and they're going to be able to talk to each other through parent-child relationships, as in the parent is going to talk to the child and send data down to the child and not the other way around. Of course, all of that will make more sense once we actually have some code going. So let's go ahead and actually create our first React component. Now this is really super easy to do. We can simply say var, and let's give this a name. Now the convention here is to use camel case with the first letter capitalized, so we can say, let's say hello world, like so. So we're going to be having a hello world component, and we can say equals react.create class, and this is going to be passing inside of this method. We're going to be passing an object. So let's have curly brackets there because that's what we do with objects, and let's open it up like so. Now you might be thinking, okay, we have a hello world. What is this create class doing? Well, this is essentially allowing us to use hello world as a component. Now what does that mean? Well, it means we'll be able to do something like hello world like so. And if you've used something like Polymer where you had web components, or Angular, you might be used to this now where you can actually define your own HTML elements. So React.createClass is allowing you to then now use this syntax. However, inside of our create class, we need a render function so that we actually know what to output. So we can say render. Now remember, since this is an object, we need a colon, and we're going to have a function here, so we can say function, like so. And now we're going to return some HTML. So let's return, and once more we need parentheses here. And you don't need them, but I kind of like to split this up. You could return this all on one line if you'd like, but for building this out, I think it's more important to see things a little bit more clearly. Now we can say h1 hello world, like so. Now, one thing you'll notice is if you ever try to do something like this with a paragraph tag and whatever, like so, React's going to get mad about this because we essentially need a containing wrapper around our render function. So for instance, if we were going to have a h1 and a paragraph in here, you'd want to wrap everything in a div tag. So again, this is the second time now that we're outputting HTML inside of JavaScript here. Once we break these components out into their own files, their own separate component systems and things like that, it's going to feel very nice. Okay, so let's head to our page where we should now for the first time see hello world output on the screen when we refresh. And as you can see, hello world. So basically our hello world is defined here. Its render function is saying to render this h1, and then on our React DOM render we're saying hello world and insert that into area. Now this seems like it was a lot of work to output an h1 with hello world onto the page, but don't worry, things are going to get really cool really quickly. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. If you have any questions or comments, leave a comment in the video or hit me up at Twitter or Facebook at Level Up Tutorials. If you want to help support Level Up Tutorials, check out store.leveluptutorials.com. There's a lot of great merchandise and digital download series there for sale. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.